The Atlanta Hawks have been one of the most disappointing teams in the 2021 and 22 season so far. They're sitting at a record right now of 20-25, the 12th seed in the Eastern Conference, after being a top 4 team in the East last year and making it all the way to the Eastern Conference Finals in the playoffs. In the offseason this year, I made a video about the Hawks, why fans shouldn't sleep on them going into this season, and why I thought that they were going to be a top 4 seed in the East again this year. And so far, this is definitely looking like one of my worst predictions in the offseason, but I still do believe in this team and I think they are going to bounce back. Right now they are on a 3-game winning streak, coming off of wins recently against the Heat and the Bucks, 2 of the best teams in the East, and they're looking like they're putting things together, and that's what I'm going to be analyzing in today's video, why I think they can really storm back and end up making the NBA playoffs this season, and why I think that's going to happen. So let's get into the analysis. Going into this season, my prediction was that the Hawks would be a top 10 offensive and defensive team in the NBA. In terms of their offense, they've actually been an insane offensive team this year, ranking 2nd in the entire league in offensive rating with a 113.2. The problem for this team has been their defense. I really like their defensive system, but so far this season, they've actually been the 3rd worst defensive team with a defensive rating of 114, which is obviously just absolutely insane and very high. It should not be this high at all. And what's happened is really just teams have been catching on to the Hawks' defensive system. Their personnel from this year to last year is pretty much the same, but teams are just catching on to their defensive system, and I'm going to go in depth with that a little bit later on in the video, but I really do think their defense can bounce back. In terms of their offense, obviously they've done a fantastic job this season, and I really do think it's going to stay this way. And this is a big reason why I think the Hawks are going to be able to bounce back, is their offensive system is just so reliable. And obviously their main centerpiece here is Trae Young, and not only has he probably had the best offensive season of his career so far this year in my opinion, but the supporting cast around him definitely fits his play style very well. The Hawks have done a fantastic job of building a team around Trae and having everyone fit together, and also have a great offensive system led by a coach named McMillan. So when we look at what Trae's done this year, he's done a really good job of running the offense, just like he has done in the last 2. Pretty much their entire offense revolves around him and him running pick and rolls, him being able to get into the paint and shoot that little floater shot he has, which is a very, very useful shot because a lot of teams' defenses will live with that shot, and Trae's able to knock it down consistently. And then this year, his 3-point shot from the top of the key has also been automatic, and his mid-range game has continued to be pretty good as well. A lot of fans across the league really thought that Trae was going to take a step down this year because of the new foul rules and how he's not going to be able to lean into the defenders anymore, but if anything, he's had actually a much better season than he did last year, and in my opinion probably deserves to be an all-star starter this year. I think DeMar DeRozan is a lock, and I think the last guard spot for the starter should be between James Harden, Zach LaVine, and Trae. I believe Trae is leading in votes right now, and he probably does deserve to get that spot. His playmaking has also been amazing, as he does fantastic job of throwing lobs to the rim and finding open guys on the perimeter for 3-point shots. He has great gravity, can draw double teams on the perimeter, and does a great job of attracting attention of the defense when he drives into the paint because of how lethal that floater he has is. And overall, he's just been a fantastic playmaker this season, as well as he's been throughout his whole career. When we look at some stats for Trae, so far this year he's averaging almost 28 points per game, almost 9.5 assists per game, and scoring pretty efficiently this year for his play style, shooting 45.5% from the field, 37% from 3, 90% from the free throw line, and an overall 59% true shooting, which is well above league average this season. So he's been fantastic, and then the supporting cast around him has been really good as well. Like I mentioned, it really fits his play style. He's got 2 very good pick and roll partners in Clint Capella and John Collins. Both of these guys do a fantastic job of effectively rolling to the rim and being great lob threats. The Hawks always, you can count on them every game to get a lot of easy baskets around the rim, especially from Capella and John Collins as well. And overall, that's really their bread and butter, is a Trae with either Collins or Capella pick and roll. And then they just have fantastic spacing and a lot of great 3-point shooters on the perimeter as well. Guys like DeAndre Hunter, Kevin Huerter, Lou Williams, and many more are really good three-point shooters on this team and open up the floor for guys like Trae and Capella to run their pick and roll, because now it can be more spaced out, and if teams do try to crowd in the paint, now they've got guys that can knock down those threes. Overall, so far this year, the Hawks rank second in the league in team three-point percentage. As a team, they're shooting 37.5% from three, which is very impressive, especially for this season. So overall, their offense has been good, and it's really consistent. I expect them to stay at this level for the rest of the season, and if they're not the second best offense in the league, I think they could definitely continue as a top 5 offense for the rest of this season and really have a reliable overall offensive system. Now, like I mentioned at the start of the video, the big problem for the Hawks so far this year has been their defense. Last year, especially in the playoffs, it worked really well for them, and like I said, I thought they would be a really good defensive team this year, but they've been horrible as they rank third last in the NBA in defensive rating with a 114 and are only behind the Portland Trailblazers and Houston Rockets, which are obviously two horrible defensive teams. And what's really happened to the Hawks this year is just teams are catching on to their defensive system. I mean, if you guys know me, I analyze basketball a lot. I watch tons of games, but I'm not really that into like the X's and O's into the game, and I'm not really that good at picking those out so far. Like, there's analysts on YouTube who are like basically coaches, and they're able to look at all the X's and O's, but I'm not really like that. But even I was able to really pick up easily on what the Atlanta Hawks defensive scheme and strategy was, and pretty much their whole defensive strategy was forcing guys to drive towards Clint Capella in the paint, who is their elite rim protector and defender, and he still is, and what that worked really well for them last year in the pick and roll. They would essentially, their perimeter defenders would guard guys so that they would roll or drive towards Clint Capella, and if they were defending them one-on-one in the corners, for example, they would allow them to drive baseline and really drive towards Capella, and everything kind of evolved around Clint Capella and his amazing rim protection and interior defense, and his great pick and roll defense as well. They also really focused on and did a good job of hiding their bad defenders. Like, for example, Trae Young is not a good defender at all. Same thing with Lou Williams from what I've watched, and last year the Hawks did a good job of hiding them, and what I mean by that is teams would try to get mismatches where Trae Young or Lou Williams or some of the other poor defenders on this team were guarding them, but the Hawks did a really good job of, for example, being switchable, putting them in positions where their bad defenders wouldn't get in mismatches, and a lot of the time they would get the matchups that they wanted defensively, and did a really good job of that. But both of these things haven't really gone that well so far this year for the Hawks. First of all, Clint Capella's missed quite a bit of time. He has missed 8 games so far this season, and the Hawks are 3-5 in those games, so that takes him out of the picture. They also have a pretty good interior defender this year in onyeka, who's developing well, so he stepped in and done a decent job as well. But also, teams have really been able to pick on the Hawks' bad defenders so far this year as well. You can tell that the offenses that are facing the Hawks have done a good job of studying their defense. They know how it works, and they've been able to get mismatches against Trae Young, against Lou Williams, against some of the other poor defenders on this team, and I think that's why they've been able to succeed so much this year against the Hawks defense. Another thing is that teams oftentimes try to get out in transition a lot against the Hawks, because when they don't get their defense set and they're not able to allow their good defenders like Clint Capella and DeAndre Hunter, John Collins to thrive and get the matchups that they want and go to the places that they want, the teams are really able to succeed a lot more against the Hawks when they get out in transition, and that's been a problem for this year as well. Not to mention that some of the defenders on this team are really bad off-ball defenders. We see this year how a lot of the time the Hawks have allowed guys to get wide open just cutting off ball, and they're not a good perimeter defending team at all, and this has been a big problem for them as teams are really picking on this and shooting a lot more threes against them and being able to get open shots on the perimeter. The Hawks are 4th last in the league in opponents' 3-point percentage, 6th last in the league in opponents' 3-pointers made per game, and 5th last in the league in overall opponent's field goal percentage. Now, I've been trashing the Hawks defense for a while here, but I really think they're going to get back to having a decent defense. It doesn't even have to be a top 10 defense anymore because their offense is just so good. But I really trust Nate McMillan to get this team's defense back on track because, first of all, we saw this last year. The Hawks were in this exact same position last season. For pretty much the whole first half of the year, they were an 8 seed to 12 seed kind of team, and then exploded at the end of the year because they took their defense from being a really bad defense to a pretty good defense, and focusing on doing things like getting the matchups that they wanted and allowing their good defenders to thrive and their bad defenders to be hidden. And I really trust Nate McMillan to get back to this because, especially in the last few games, we've seen how the Hawks have been able to manipulate the X's and O's of their defense a little bit better and get the matchups that they want. Guys like DeAndre Hunter and John Collins are now becoming the ones that are defending on ball a lot more of the time, and Nate McMillan is picking up to what offenses are doing to expose their defense, and they've improved, especially over the last few games. I think that's really going to carry over into the rest of this season, and now that Clint Capella is back fully healthy as well, they're still going to have that dominant interior defender that they can use a lot of the time to effectively guard the pick and roll and guard the paint. Not to mention, like I briefly mentioned as well, that Onyeka has developed into a great interior defender and shot blocker this year as well, and he can give them some valuable minutes off of the bench, even more valuable than last year where we saw in the playoffs how he would come in and be a decent interior presence. He can do that a lot more and effectively this season as well. So basically my main point here is the Hawks defense has really been exposed this year, but especially recently they've been getting back to their good ways, and I do trust Nate McMillan and the system to get back to the way, not exactly the way that they were last season, especially in the playoffs, but get back to being at least an average defensive team. And if they can do that, their dominant offense led by Trae Young and their supporting cast around him is going to do their job as well and still be a dominant offensive team. And the combination of a dominant offense and an average defense, I think will definitely be able to lead them to go on pretty much a big surge here at the end of the season and get back into at least a play-in spot, and from there maybe get into the NBA playoffs. Something to briefly mention as well is, even though the Hawks defense has been pretty horrible so far this season, I would definitely say that their overall record hasn't really given a good representation of how good they've actually been this year. They haven't lost games by a lot at all, as their net rating is pretty much even at about a minus 0.5 right now, which means on average that's pretty much how much they're losing games by. So that's definitely a pretty low number for sure. It's not like they're losing games by a lot, and they've also had a really tough schedule for the first part of the season, as the remaining schedule is actually the 5th easiest in the NBA, meaning that it was the 5th hardest for the first half of the season. So I think that this will really allow them as well to do what I've been saying and have a good surge for the second half of the season, not to mention everything else I've talked about how good their offense is and how their defense will be able potentially to get back to playing at a decent level. So there you have it. That's all I've got for you guys in today's video. This is why I think the Atlanta Hawks will be able to surge back and end up making the playoffs this season. Make sure you guys leave your comments down below on your thoughts on the Atlanta Hawks and if you think they're going to make the playoffs this year and come back from a poor start, and I'll see you all next video.